Welcome to my channel. Here are all 62 Disney animated films in order from the first one ever made all the way through 2023's Wish. This is not including any direct-to-video sequels or spin-off movies. The first era of Disney animation began with the studio's founding in 1923 and lasted through the end of World War II. It was truly a magical time for animation. With no real competition from other studios, Disney Animation was able to thrive and make their dreams come true. 9 movies were released during this time. The first movie was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. This movie was a massive success, and it remains the most watched movie of all time. Pinocchio followed in 1940. Although it was also a hit, it was less so than Snow White. Fantasia was released that same year and was unlike anything else. It featured no real plot and instead showcased classical music and interesting visuals. Only one more movie would be released in the decade. Dumbo came out in 1941, and although it was another financial success, critics weren't so fond of the film. Bambi was released 2 years later in 1942 and was the last movie of the Golden Age. This movie tackled mature themes and dealt with the death of Bambi's mother. It was praised by critics upon its initial release, but only grossed average numbers at the box office. This would lead to Disney Animation to kind of go on a hiatus after the start of World War II. During the Second World War, Walt Disney traveled around entertaining U.S. troops. Instead of releasing theatrically produced animated features, Disney Animation released for package films which contained 2 or 3 shorts bundled together. Saludos Amigos was released in 1943 and featured Donald Duck. The Three Caballeros followed in 1945 and co-starred with Donald and Jose Carollo. In 1946, Disney released Make Mine Music. It contained 8 different musical numbers along with the debut of Ludwig von Drake. Fun and Fancy Free was released in 1947 and featured Mickey and Minnie Mouse. Melody Time was released in 1948 and featured several different Disney characters. And finally, in 1949, Disney released The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, which was based on stories by Washington Irving and Kenneth Graham. After the war ended, Disney Animation had re-emerged and they were ready to take on the competition. The Silver Age began in 1950 with Cinderella. This movie was a huge hit and marked the return of an original story as there was no source material to adapt from. Alice in Wonderland followed in 1951 and was another success. However, it received mixed reviews from critics. Peter Pan was released 3 years later and is still loved by audiences today. Lady and the Tramp came out in 1955, and although it was another great success, it was overshadowed by the debut of Disneyland in the same year. Sleeping Beauty was released in 1959 and was Disney's first movie in CinemaScope. It unfortunately did not do well at the box office, but over the years it has grown on audiences. 101 Dalmatians was released 2 years later and was the first movie produced by Walt Disney Productions. After Walt's death in 1966, the studio would never be the same. The next era would be known as the Bronze Age or Dark Age. The first movie of this era was The Aristocats in 1970. This movie was the lowest grossing theatrical release in Disney history up until 1982's The Sword and the Stone. Robin Hood followed in 1973 and was another flop. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh was released in 1977 and was a compilation of 3 featurettes about everyone's favorite bear. That same year, Disney released The Rescuers, which was their first movie to be produced by the newly created Walt Disney Productions. The Fox and the Hound was released in 1981 and was a critical success. The next 2 movies were not so much. The Black Cauldron was released in 1985 and was Disney's first and only movie to receive a PG rating. The Great Mouse Detective followed in 1986 and was another flop. Oliver and Company was released 2 years later and was the last movie of the era. Disney Animation had been struggling for nearly a decade, and it seemed like the studio would never return to form. But that all changed with the release of The Little Mermaid in 1989. This movie kicked off what is now known as the Disney Renaissance. Over the next 10 years, Disney Animation released 10 amazing films. The Little Mermaid was followed by The Rescuers Down Under in 1990, which was another hit. Beauty and the Beast was released a year later and was the first animated movie to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. Unfortunately, it lost out to The Silence of the Lambs. Aladdin was another big hit in 1992. The Lion King was released 2 years later and was both a critical and commercial triumph. Pocahontas came out in 1995 and was actually the highest-grossing movie of the year. The Hunchback of Notre Dame was released a year later and was a bit darker than previous films. Hercules came out in 1997 and was another success. Mulan was released 2 years later and was one of the most controversial films of the era. Finally, in 1999, Disney released Tarzan. Although it was another hit, it marked the end of the Disney Renaissance. For the next few years, Disney experimented with new things. In 2000, Fantasia 2000 was released to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the original. It featured new segments featuring popular music of the 1990s. Dinosaur was also released in 2000. It was Disney's first film to be produced entirely digitally. The Emperor's New Groove was released that same year and was a departure from the typical Disney movie. It was the first movie to be produced under the direction of new studio head Michael Eisner. Atlantis, The Lost Empire was released in 2001. It featured a unique art style inspired by Jules Verne. Lilo and Stitch followed in 2002. This movie tackled adult themes and dealt with loss. Treasure Planet was also released in 2002. It was based on the classic story of Treasure Island and was heavily influenced by science fiction. Brother Bear was released in 2003. It featured amazing animation and tackled Native American culture. Home on the Range was released in 2004. It featured the voices of some famous actors, but unfortunately was a flop. Chicken Little was released in 2005. It featured computer-generated animation and was based on the fable. Meet the Robinsons was released in 2007. It was another computer-animated movie and was based on the short My Favorite Martian. Bolt was released 2 years later in 2008. It starred John Travolta and was about a dog who believed he had superpowers. After the release of Bolt, Disney decided to experiment even more. Instead of focusing on animated movies, they released a mix of live action and animated films. This would lead to what is known as the Disney Revival era. The first movie was The Princess and the Frog in 2009. This was a return to traditional hand-drawn animation and was the first film to feature a black princess. Tangled was released in 2010. It was loosely based on the fairy tale Rapunzel. Winnie the Pooh was released in 2011. It was another hand-drawn film and was based on A. Milne's books. Frozen was released in 2013 and was a huge hit. Big Hero 6 was released in 2014 and was based on the Marvel Comics. Zootopia was released in 2016. It tackled social issues and was praised by critics. Mona was released that same year and featured the music of Lin-Manuel Miranda. Ralph Breaks the Internet was released in 2018. It was a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph and was the first film to tackle internet culture. Frozen 2 was released in 2019 and was the first film to be released in IMAX 3D. This brings us to the modern era or post-revival era of Disney animation. The first movie was Raya and the Last Dragon in 2021. It featured amazing visuals and was inspired by Southeast Asian cultures. Encanto was released that same year. It featured music by Colombian singer and songwriter Shakira. Strange World was released in 2022. It featured the voice of Jake Gyllenhaal and tackled environmental issues. And the most recent film is Wish. It was released in 2023 and is the studio's 100th animated film. So that's all 62 Disney animated films in order. What is your favorite? If you like this video, check out another one on the channel. Thanks for watching.